Helmets on for safety. Welcome back to Random. And if it's 5 o'clock somewhere and you enjoy a nice cold beverage and some nice tunes at the end of the day, you want to check out Beer and Song of the Day. The link to their channel will be in the description below. Now, today's episode is all about that time a group of college students got together and, well, they decided they wanted to find a better way to cure cancer. Now, this happened back in the early 1990s, and due to Google censoring certain facts about the article and the research in question, I can't find the exact date, but I can tell you it was done by the Medical College of Virginia. And believe it or not, my editor actually did his job and wrote stuff down this time. Okay. Yeah, we're getting real professional here, folks. Okay, so the MCV cannabis study research was done in the early 1990s, and again, Google decided to censor a lot of that information about exactly when it was. The research was in regards to Delta 9 THC and Delta 8 THC specifically. All right, so what the students did was they isolated the THC compounds from cannabis, and they created an oil from it and administered it to lab mice that had tumors. That's how they set up their experiment. Okay, so one group, being the control group, would have the standard treatment, chemo, radiation, and the experiment group would be given the different compounds of THC. Now, what they found out was the control group, of course, being injected with chemotherapy drugs and subjected to radiation treatments, of course, the tumors that those lab rats had would start to die over time, as it does with chemotherapy and radiation therapy in human patients. Unfortunately, chemotherapy and radiation therapy are both part of the very old and very outdated and exceptionally barbaric practice of treat the illness by killing the patient. Not exactly popular. Now, believe it or not, in the early 1990s and even up till today, chemotherapy and radiation treatments only have, at a ballpark, 3 or 4% success rate. That's right. Out of 100 patients going through chemo or radiation therapy, only 3 or 4 of them ever had their cancer go into remission. Now, chemotherapy and radiation therapies are both toxic to the body, okay? So, yes, chemotherapy is supposed to be targeted at tumors. Unfortunately, due to the compounds involved, regular healthy cells will also absorb those chemotherapy chemicals and medicines, and they'll start to die too. Now, the THC group, and here's where it gets interesting. The THC group, after a period of 10 days, it was noted in the initial research back in the early 1990s that the tumors would stop spreading. That's important, okay? So it was an anti-neoplastic characteristic of the THC compounds. For all intents and purposes, that means the tumors couldn't go other places aside from where they initially were. Now, after 20 days of continued dosage, it was noted that the tumors actually reduced in size by a measurable amount. Now, did that mean they shriveled up and died immediately? No, that simply meant that from day 10 to day 20, there was a remarkable difference in size, and that size was smaller. Now, why did we not hear about this back in the early 1990s when the study was actually conducted? We'll get into that shortly. Actually, we'll get into that just now. So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, because this research was done by an accredited university in Virginia, they had to publish all of their findings. They had to publish all of their results and present it to the FDA for potential publishment. Well, because the FDA is a public organization, all the information that is transmitted and shared with the FDA has to be available to everyone. And that includes pharmaceutical industries. And wouldn't you know it, there was a whole lot of interest by those pharmaceutical industries to keep certain things available and on the market so that those pharmaceutical companies could continue to turn a profit. Yeah, that's right. The Food and Drug Administration was basically the watchdog and the bully for the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the initial stages of the research, unfortunately, were halted before the study could continue. Gee, I wonder why. The idea is, at least as far as the pharmaceutical industry is concerned, they're not interested in a cure. They're interested in a treatment. They want their patients and their patrons and their customers to be just alive enough to continue to buy their product versus getting a one-shot hit to make the affliction or the disease go away completely forever. Now, one of the big takeaways is this. THC, being a compound synonymous with cannabis and its different derivatives, can be grown anywhere. And I do mean anywhere. Anywhere you can have soil and light and water and somebody to take care of it, you've got a plant that, for all intents and purposes, could, at least from the initial study, cure cancer. Now, if you can do that on your own, in your own backyard, what need have you to go to the doctor and be prescribed poison? You wouldn't need it. So, again, the pharmaceutical industry basically had the FDA shut down the research and confiscate all the data and all the materials, and it was shelved for better than 20 years. Now, this was, of course, the initial study and the initial beginning of the research into cannabis as a treatment for ailments, specifically cancer in this instance, but there were other studies planned, studies that included psychological treatment. So you got somebody that is panicking and they're worried about everything and they're pulling their hair out and they're not being very productive members of society, right? Well, if they had access to something, whether pharmaceutical or not, that could help them become more productive, help them be a member of society, help their neighbors, help their families, so on. Well, the pharmaceutical industry would be interested in that, and they would want to sell that. They wouldn't necessarily want you to be able to get it for yourself for pennies on the dollar. So another reason why the FDA shut down that research. And then, of course, things like hypertension, high cholesterol, and so on. Things like nitroglycerin pills would be used for people that have artery conditions or cardiovascular problems, and they need to thin their blood so their hearts can pump more efficiently. Well, if you're relaxed, if your heart's not pumping as hard, you don't need something to clean your arteries out quite so much. You don't need the blood thinners because your heart's not pumping so hard. So again, part of that research would have induced and would have concluded that THC compounds would have helped with hypertension and high blood pressure and high cholesterol. So again, the pharmaceutical industry didn't want that getting out. Gee, I wonder why. Now, the limits of those research and those studies, unfortunately, weren't necessarily well broadcast or weren't well defined because, again, this is the early 1990s and it was a bunch of college students rather than professors or full-on doctors. Now, medical student is, after a certain degree, technically a doctor, but they have to devote their entire time, their entire life, their entire career into the study of this particular effect, of this particular drug, of this particular treatment. It takes decades, and because the FDA clamped down on it back in the early 1990s, again, we wasted effectively 20 years of research that could have changed people's lives, but it didn't. all because of government interference. So if you think Big Brother is good for you, well, you got another thing coming. So that's about it for this episode of Random. If you learned anything, please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. It tells you when new videos come out. And I want to give a thank you to all my subscribers. You are what this makes. I promise I didn't smoke anything earlier today. You subscribers are what makes this channel succeed. You are what makes this possible, and I want to thank you all. And believe it or not, we're actually getting more views than CNN, so thank you for that. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and as always, keep it random.